A marriage looks ordinary until the structure beneath it fails, converting predictability into a disaster that exposes the secret rules of human ownership. Josh Powell cultivated an image of the responsible, practical husband, smiling in photos and discussing a stable future for his wife, Susan, and their 2 young sons. Yet, the foundation was not partnership, but control, secrecy, and a silent accounting of power that operated until the entire construction collapsed into fire and absence. The public image of the family stood against a background of psychological instability rooted in the husband's origins. Records show Josh grew up in a home where conflict was a steady presence and boundaries were inconsistent, shaped by a father whose behavior was later described in interviews and press reports as destabilizing and abusive. These experiences, while not diagnostic, appeared consistent with a learned pattern: a cold focus on dominance over people instead of care for them, an essential mechanism that later defined the risks within his own family. Susan Cox met Josh when they were young and hopeful, marrying in 2001 and embarking on a classic beginning marked by shared church events and holidays. However, the private ledger of the relationship quickly diverged from the public milestones, as Susan began keeping journals and sending emails that recorded arguments, financial withdrawal, and rules she had not agreed to. This shift from a shared calendar to a private clock measuring fights marked the silent inversion of their life, moving from a joint effort to an isolated confinement. Initial warning signs were carefully disguised within the framework of practical decisions, making early intervention difficult for outsiders. Josh claimed control over the finances, setting spending plans, enforcing limits on Susan's access to money, and purchasing expensive items without mutual agreement. Simultaneously, he pulled back from church, from her family, and from shared social time, rationalizing each choice with reasons like work, stress, or privacy, all of which served the single function of systematically removing layers of Susan's external support. This process of isolation was maintained by intermittent, confusing data drops that kept the victim and witnesses off balance, allowing the pattern to build unexposed. A micro-reveal might manifest as a budget change that never made economic sense, or a phone call that was abruptly cut short whenever a family member asked pointed questions, ensuring no single anomaly seemed large enough to trigger an alarm. The enduring danger is found in how these small, forgivable habits accumulate, creating a sealed environment where normal life becomes the perfect shield for growing predation.
Before we go on, a small favor, please subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Thank you, and let's continue with the story.
The marriage then settled around a few fixed, non-negotiable points that determined the structure of Susan's days. These constraints centered on access, who Susan could see, and under what strict rules, belief, who decided the family's participation in church, and money, who tracked it, who spent it, and who controlled the earnings. Every small choice was forced in the same direction, constructing severe limits around Susan, while she desperately tried to keep the appearance of a normal family life intact for the sake of her sons. Susan's internal response was to engage in a quiet counter-strategy. She began to store documents, chronicle arguments, and write that she feared for her safety if she pushed too hard against the rigid control. Her documentation was a conscious effort to build a record for a future that might exclude her husband, a crucial act of preparation that transformed private fear into a potential line of public evidence. Friends and co-workers noticed the strain, yet the behavior remained normalized as domestic conflict, slowing any effective intervention. The pressure increased when the Utah economy tightened in the late 2000s, adding external strain to the already tense home atmosphere. Though external financial stress might explain some frugality, Josh's spending continued to swing unpredictably between impulse and exaggerated restraint. keeping the financial control lever erratic and difficult to predict. Susan adjusted daily routines to protect the young boys from the conflict, documenting her fear of what might happen if she left and noting the corrosive influence of Josh's father. Her emotional shift in 2008 marked the point of no return. Her writing focused less on attempts to save the marriage and more on the calculated steps necessary to ensure her own survival. This psychological maneuver created a clear separation of knowledge, where she entrusted a handwritten last will and testament to a friend, warning explicitly that if she died, it should not be assumed to be an accident. This secret act was the foundation of the structural inversion, turning a belief in reconciliation into a determined strategy for escape. The corrosion of their routines manifested in small, concrete ways that, in isolation, seemed non-criminal. He monitored her phone, checked her mileage, and controlled the home thermostat to save money, sometimes keeping the temperature so low the children wore coats indoors. When these individual rules are stacked, they form a clear and observable pattern of entrapment, demonstrating how financial restriction, social gatekeeping, and demands for compliance operate as the gears of coercive control. The risk factor amplified by the continuing shadow of Josh's father, Stephen Powell, whose influence Susan viewed with long-standing distrust. Court records and subsequent investigations described Stephen Powell's behavior as obsessive and invasive, including material later seized by police. This daily modeling of boundary violation and dominance within the extended family taught a dangerous lesson: that surveillance could be presented as care and rules could replace empathy. December 2009 ended all pretense of stability when Susan disappeared, failing to show up for work and leaving messages unanswered. Law enforcement found her belongings, her purse, identification, and phone, inside the home, a scene that looked deliberately stripped of evidence, staged to conceal the nature of her exit. This immediate, profound anomaly signaled that the private danger had finally broken through the public facade. Josh's immediate explanation was a late-night midwinter camping trip with their 2 young children, an act that defied common sense, weather conditions, and normal parenting patterns. The story stood alone, a calculated gap in the timeline that no witness could support and no logic could close. Investigators noted signs of recent cleaning inside the house and items drying on a heater, evidence of an attempt to impose order onto a chaotic event. The initial assumption that Susan might have fled a difficult marriage collapsed under the weight of the evidence left behind.
Before we go on, a small favor, please subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. Thank you, and let's continue with the story.
Her car was in the driveway, credit cards unused, and most damningly, her will surfaced, explicitly reversing the narrative from uncertainty to foresight. This chilling premonition reframed her prior fear not as anxiety, but as an informed record of an impending catastrophe. The institutional system, designed to move on proof, struggled to bridge the gap between Susan's documented pattern of fear and the high threshold required for criminal charges. Her journal excerpts and shared emails tracked financial control and threats, forming a strong context of risk. But the absence of a body meant a core fact remained unresolved, slowing every official decision. This gap allowed the controlling partner to leverage process against consequence, using due process as a tool for delay. The initial near miss was the failure of the system to act decisively on Susan's explicit caution signals that documented her desire to live and her knowledge of the internal risk. If those documents had been treated not as mere marital complaints, but as verifiable evidence of coercive control, the boys might have been placed into protective custody sooner. Instead, the case had to move slowly on verifiable statements and timelines, allowing the window of risk to remain open. Susan's final letter, meant to be opened in the event of her death, did not rely on legal terminology, but on stated distrust and a plea for protection for her children. This document later became a powerful piece of evidence, transforming the perception of the events from a sudden crisis into a slow, deliberate construction built by a consistent pattern of control. The letter functioned as a silent testimony, ensuring her voice would persist even after the means of her survival were exhausted. Josh's immediate decision to relocate to Washington with the boys maintained his control over access and narrative, demonstrating a calculated resistance to transparency and official scrutiny. He lawyered up, refused polygraph tests, and kept the children sequestered from interviews, moves that consistently prioritized image and distance over cooperation with the investigation. This defensive posture, while superficially reasonable from a distance, served the single function of protecting his control. The environment around the boys in Washington did not look safe, as social workers documented concerns about privacy, boundaries, and a lack of empathy within the home. Reports indicated that Josh's obsessive father, Stephen, further destabilized the children's daily lives, creating an atmosphere where normative behavior was constantly undermined. This provided a concrete situational constraint, ensuring that the custody conflict played out in an environment of escalating risk. By 2011, the legal struggle for custody intensified, forcing the court to intervene by ordering the boys into protective care with only supervised visitation allowed. This decision structurally inverted Josh's dominance, as he now operated under the constraints of a neutral monitor and fixed protocols. The court's action was a partial victory for safety, yet it simultaneously elevated the stakes for the controlling partner, who could perceive the loss of custody as total annihilation. A subsequent psychological evaluation, cited in media coverage at the time, reported that Josh displayed traits consistent with narcissistic features and adjustment problems. The language used was careful, avoiding a clinical diagnosis but describing observed behavior that included self-focus, rigid control, a lack of empathy, and an inability to prioritize his children's needs over his own. This professional assessment provided a logical framework for understanding his evasiveness and his consistent resistance to external accountability. Physical evidence of prior domestic escalation emerged, including small traces of Susan's blood found on the floor near the couch. A handwritten note matching her writing was also discovered, reinforcing her expressed mistrust and confirming that the psychological control had previously advanced into physical danger. These fragments provided controlled uncertainty, confirming the violent potential long before the final catastrophic act. The second near miss occurred during a supervised visit in early 2012, when safety protocols required a neutral monitor and a check of the home prior to entry. The plan was standard and predictable, but when the boys approached the front door, Josh pulled them inside and deliberately blocked the monitor, locking the door in a fractional, violent moment. This split-second delay created a fatal gap between policy and the necessary immediate force, proving that the most determined actor will exploit the narrowest margin in procedure. The failure point was not a single institutional error, but the nature of the delay, a fractional moment when the door closed, separating the boys from the mandated supervisor. The social worker's call to 911 became part of the public record, an audible testimony to the realization that the safety measures had been turned into a trap. The house exploded shortly after, ending the investigation and erasing the line of young witnesses who might have spoken for Susan. The final catastrophe was immediate, planned, and violent. Police later confirmed a hatchet attack before the blast consumed the structure, ensuring a complete and irreversible end. The explosion, which erased physical evidence inside the home, was simultaneously an action that observers called a virtual confession to the prior disappearance of Susan. The finality of the act collapsed all remaining ambiguity, converting years of tension and suspicion into an undeniable sequence of events. Subsequent investigation revealed the controlled nature of the end. Digital searches, changes to life insurance arrangements, and written messages of farewell. These were not acts of panic, but markers of calculated intent, clarifying a limited motive. The controlled end was designed to prevent the loss of custody and maintain an image of total dominance until the last second. The violent act was the ultimate escalation, where the collapse of control was met with the elimination of everything that had been owned. The insight payoff of the case begins with the clear view of the four-stage mechanism of control escalation. Control begins as rules, escalating to isolation, then to planning, and finally to the complete removal of all exits, both physical and psychological. This pattern reveals how an individual constructs a closed system. Communication narrows, money centralizes, external support weakens, and the person at risk begins to secretly build counter-records. This mechanism also illuminates the paradox of leaving. The moment a victim asserts independence and plans an exit is the single most dangerous point in the relationship. Leaving converts psychological control into open, overt conflict, often intensifying the threat and narrowing the window for safe escape. Susan's careful preparation was an acknowledgement of this fact, yet her window was narrow and she was still within reach when she vanished. Manipulation thrives precisely because it wears the clothes of normal behavior, leveraging shared frameworks like marriage, trust, and shared responsibility to hide its true function. A camping trip is plausible, a late bill is an oversight, and a restriction on friends is presented as a healthy couple's boundary. The full pattern is revealed only when these isolated events are stacked together and charted against a clear timeline. Susan's great counter-mechanism was her consistent and diligent documentation, which transformed her private fear into verifiable public evidence. She recorded behavior, not just emotions, logging dates, rules, arguments, and statements made in private. This choice, focusing on concrete facts over subjective feelings, became the scaffold that kept her story intact, giving her back the voice that someone tried to remove. The institutions that managed the case were constrained by the necessity of physical proof, with the absence of a body in 2009 slowing down every subsequent decision. Law enforcement requires verifiable evidence, courts demand a high threshold of risk before removing children, and social services must enforce clear conditions. The system moved in stepwise fashion: evaluations, conditions, supervised visits, a protocol that worked until the seconds mattered more than the policy. The husband's public performance became a structural inversion as he leaned into a profile of a wounded but functioning parent, allowing controlled displays of emotion to signal vulnerability while resisting scrutiny. He deflected blame onto the missing wife's family and the media, adopting the language of patience and survival to frame himself as coping rather than concealing. This presentation benefited the wrong side, as calm speech and measured tones were rewarded with public trust, crowding out suspicion. The most sober reward for the careful observer is the cognitive mastery that reduces chaos to a discernible pattern, replacing emotional confusion with rational sequence. The observer learns to treat small rules becoming big walls as data, to notice when urgency is paired with zero transparency, and to recognize that control is the point, not the byproduct. This clarity offers a quiet confidence, not hope for a positive outcome, but comprehension of the route that leads to collapse. The case ends with the uncertainty lock. The question of justice remains open. The central fact of Susan's location is still unresolved, and no trial transcript settles the full motive in legal ink. This lack of total closure keeps the moral curiosity active, leaving a residue of unease that demands constant vigilance. The only certainty is the convergence of lines, pattern, timeline, statements, behavior, and outcomes that point to one man's control and one woman's attempt to escape it. The core structure of the behavioral code is both durable and fragile, existing anywhere an unresolved case meets a parent who controls access. It is fragile because it depends on silence and isolation. Yet it is durable because it uses normal life as its cover, building its architecture inside ordinary relationships. The lesson extends outward. If control appears early and often, it should be treated not as a phase, but as a design. The ultimate loss of the two young boys sits next to a stack of documents that explain much, but still leave a part unsaid: the waiting. Their names remain in court filings and school memories, a constant reminder of the unseen danger that many families live with, convinced something is wrong, yet waiting for the proof that meets the system's standard. The children's tragedy marks the boundary where policy must move at the speed of evidence, not the speed of optimism. The lack of a final verdict or confession means closure is not an emotion, but a set of practical, operational changes that align procedure with risk realities. After review, law enforcement agencies drew training points from the timeline, leading to refinements in supervised visit protocols, door control procedures, and rapid response triggers when high-risk control traits are flagged. These quiet outcomes are built from the materials Susan used: names, dates, records, and serve not to erase loss, but to prevent repetition. The greatest insight for the public is the quiet power of pattern recognition, the ability to see the code while others are still trusting the face. It is the summation of small choices that aligned: a husband who restricted and concealed, a wife who documented and warned, and a system that saw risk yet moved stepwise, ending at a door that closed too fast for policy to stop it. Trust is revealed not through performance, but through a transparent record, and when the two conflict, the record is the final judge. The pattern remains active because the psychology that fuels it persists, ready to appear in other homes, using normal life as a shield. It will present itself as promises to change. It will escalate when challenged, and it waits where information is fragmented and safety plans assume cooperation. The disruption must come from documentation, from friends who treat private worry as public evidence, and from courts that learn to read pattern as well as proof. This sober awareness is the quiet victory in a case that offers no other legal satisfaction. All interpretations are based on publicly available information. This content does not make medical or diagnostic claims, nor does it speculate beyond established evidence.
If you'd like to keep exploring cases like this, there's another one waiting for you on screen. I think you'll find it meaningful. Click on it, and thank you for watching.